ranking the 12 best starting fives if everyone was in their prime. What does that mean exactly? Well, it's simple. If a player played for a team at any point in their career, they're eligible to be ranked in their all-time five as if they were in their primes. So for example, Dwayne Wade played a year for the Cleveland Cavaliers later in his career. So spoiler alert, later on in the video, he's going to be ranked in their all-time starting five based on how good he was in his prime. Let's not overcomplicate things, but the last thing I will say is to be included, every player must be playing their natural go-to position. But okay, let's start with number 12, which goes to the Brooklyn Nets for Jason Kidd, James Harden, Dr. J, Kevin Durant, and Bob McAdoo. I wanted to put Kyrie Irving as their point guard so we could get the Nets what-if big three here, but there was no way I could rank him over Kidd. But we still do get the duo of KD and Harden that we never really got to see play that many games together in their prime. They didn't play that many games together in Brooklyn at all. I do love this five though, because with having Jason Kidd at point guard to run the team, that takes all the stress off of Harden to do so. And in the meantime, he can just be a natural scorer like he's supposed to. They would play small with Durant at power forward, but McAdoo would be a monster down low, so I think he would make up for it. Oh, and then just casually throw in an all-time great small forward into the mix with Dr. J too. At 11, we slightly level up, going over to the San Antonio Spurs for Tony Parker, Tracy McGrady, Kawhi Leonard, Tim Duncan, and David Robinson. As you'll remember, T-Mac did play for the Spurs in 2013 for a few playoffs games in what was his last season in the league, so he just barely makes it into their lineup, and also does so by slightly beating out George Gervin for the spot. The Spurs 5 is wild though. We saw Tony, Kawhi, and Tim play together, but Kawhi wasn't in his prime, and we saw Tim and David play together, but Tim wasn't in his prime at the time. So to imagine all of them in their primes at the same time, with them playing in the Spurs system, is crazy. Plus, I think T-Mac would be the perfect high-volume scorer for this lineup because he'd have the right attitude about when to step aside for his teammates. And all of that isn't even to mention that the defense on this team would be next level. I'm an even bigger fan of number 10 though, because the Houston Rockets have a lineup of Chris Paul, James Harden, Scottie Pippen, Charles Barkley, and Hakeem. And this is another interesting one. We saw Chris and James team up, and Pippen, Chuck, and Olajuwon form a super team together. But once again, neither was when everyone was in their primes. If they all were though, well, just CP3, Harden, and Hakeem as a big three would be insane, thanks to all the lobs, the teamwork, and the scoring. And they'd be the main guys, so it's wild to imagine that an MVP caliber Charles Barkley would be your fourth option. And then Scottie Pippen would be your fifth. Let's be honest, Pippen would rarely get the ball, but as a defensive stopper, himself and Hakeem could dominate every end of the floor. I may regret putting the Chicago Bulls at number 9, but their five would be prime Derrick Rose, Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, Dennis Rodman, and Robert Parrish. We saw all three of these guys play together in their primes, which is a first for the video. And don't get me wrong, they did play with some solid point guards and centers in their days, but nobody on an all-time scale. And no one that would even be compared to prime D Rose or a defensive stopper like Parrish. This is a dominant team on both ends, and the only thing they're missing out on is shooting. At the number 8 spot, the Milwaukee Bucks are really carried there by two men, and their starting five is Oscar Robertson, Ray Allen, Bob Dandridge, Giannis, and Kareem. Don't get me wrong, I'm not taking anything away from a top 3-point guard all time, one of the best 3-point shooters ever, or an elite two-way player. But when you see this team, your mind instantly wanders off to imagine what Giannis and Kareem would be able to do on the same team. And I was kind of surprised that there have been no better small forwards for the Bucks than Dandridge over the years. As a whole though, these guys would definitely play inside out, and since they have a little bit of everything, that tends to always work out really well. The number 7 spots may be one of my favorite starting fives of the whole video because it belongs to the Toronto Raptors, and it looks like this: Kyle Lowry, Vince Carter, Kawhi Leonard, Chris Bosh, and Hakeem Olajuwon. Don't forget, Hakeem played his very last season for the Toronto Raptors, so he was just barely able to take the center spot. And I just love how well-rounded this team is. And they're a team that could play and thrive back in the 80s and 90s, or just as easily translate and dominate in 2023. They have shooting, defense, the ability to attack the rim, and perfect spacing. I mean, a Chris Bosh and Hakeem Olajuwon frontcourt is no joke. Then to have a backcourt with a passive Kyle Lowry, a dunker like Vince, and a silent leader in Kawhi, and these guys have every single asset they need to succeed. Number 6 is also another one that I love though, and it's the Phoenix Suns for their starters of Steve Nash, Devin Booker, Kevin Durant, Charles Barkley, and Shaq. You could arguably put CP3 over Steve Nash, but I wanted to include the two-time MVP. Of course, Shaq played for the Suns later in his career, but we're talking about getting his Lakers form onto this Suns team. I mean, we're watching the current day duo of Booker and KD play out in recent years, and they're two of the most efficient and unstoppable scorers of all time. So if that would be paired with a guy like Shaq, there's nothing any other team would be able to do. That is, if Shaq and Chuck would actually be able to get along and take things seriously. If they could though, having Steve Nash at point guard here couldn't possibly possibly be any better. An elite passer that could run a team full of elite players and make every single one of them better, and at the same time not care if he gets any shots off for a full game. Another portion of an all-time prime starting five we've actually seen play together goes to the Golden State Warriors, because those goes to Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Kevin Durant, Ralph Sampson, and Wilt Chamberlain. Not gonna lie, I always knew the Warriors the all-time five of these three, and Wilt Chamberlain was insane, but the inclusion of Ralph Sampson really threw me off. I forgot he played for the Warriors in 87 and 88, and at 7'4", having him and Wilt in the front court would just be unfair. Not even to mention they'd be playing with the three greatest shooters of all time, which is even more unfair, as we know, because we had to watch it. Don't forget how bad that was. Let's also not forget how good number 4 would be in the Celtics, because they'd have Gary Payton, Ray Allen, Larry Bird, Kevin Garnett, and Shaq. And there's a few things here. I know the biggest one is the inclusion of Shaq over Bill Russell, but it's a big 50-50 on who you want to include. Personally, I have Shaq slightly better all time, and even though Shaq only played his final season for Boston at 38 years old, sure, he kinda sneaks his way in here, but that really worked out in the Celtics' favor. The other major surprise here is Gary Payton. You might not have expected to see him here, but he played one season in Boston right before he won that championship with Miami. So we have his defense to go along with Ray and Bird's shooting, to go along with KG and Shaq's MVP level play, which is why they all definitely deserve their inclusion within the top 5. The top 3 though takes a step up, because number 3 is the Cleveland Cavaliers for Kyrie Irving, Dwayne Wade, LeBron James, Kevin Love, and Shaq. D-Wade played that one extremely weird year in Cleveland, so he makes their team, and Shaq played there later in his career, so he made it too. This big 3 won one of the greatest NBA championships of all time. It was when LeBron and Kyrie were both at their best. So if you were to add a 30-point per game scorer in Wade, a 26 and 13 Wolves Kevin Love, and of course Shaq, once again, well, nobody could ever stop this squad. The floor spacing would be perfect, the options late in games would be there, and not even to mention how fun it would be to see prime Shaq and LeBron duo. But speaking of that, number 2 is actually very similar, and it comes thanks to the Miami Heat with Gary Payton once again, a prime D-Wade, a prime LeBron James, Chris Bosh, and once again Shaq. Wade, Bosh, and LeBron had a super team, and Wade, Payton, and Shaq sort of had one too, so it's weird. There's 2 different super teams at play here that are all blended together with Dwayne in the middle. But to have the Heatles big 3 who were starting Mario Chalmers at point guard and Birdman at center at one point, and now have them playing with Payton and Shaq, well, it'd be over. And sure, O'Neal's kind of dominating this video at this point, but that's just what he does. Both Gary and O'Neal would fit in perfectly with those guys though, and even though they'd have to slow things down a little bit so Shaq could keep up, of course they definitely still make it work. Not even to mention the underrated combo of Bosh and Shaq playing together. Then finally for number 1, it should be no surprise to anybody that it's the Los Angeles Lakers for their team of Magic Johnson, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Karl Malone, and Kareem. I did actually get to mix this one up a little bit here with Karl Malone over other options you might have been thinking like Pau Gasol or Anthony Davis, because Karl played his last year in LA and now we'd get to see his prime form on this super team. And the last thing they needed was to be able to make things any more unfair than they already were. I don't even know where to start with these guys. Arguably the best point guard ever, the best center ever, the best small forward ever, the second best shooting guard ever, and the second best power forward of all time. They literally have almost the best player at every single position on their team. So yeah, they definitely deserve the number 1 spot. Now if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'm out.